again, one of the messages that I got from the non-human intelligence is what they wanted people to know about them and that they're here. And I'm thinking, like, how am I going to communicate that? But even, like, number one, who am I to even communicate that? But I had realized that, like, unless somebody has an experience for themselves, it's not going to click.
Welcome back. I'm here again with James Iandoli. How you doing, man?
Good. Great to be back here with you.
I think we left
so
on a bit of a cliffhanger. There's probably a lot of angry people. Like, why did Sean do this to us?
Yeah.
So, okay. So you had a number of experiences. The last experience you related was about the hexagonal shaped craft. Were there any experiences between that and the contact thing that are relevant, or do you want to start with the contact download?
Oh, well, I mean, there was actually, because after all those experiences, I got very involved in what people call CE5, right? And the CE5 initiative. And I found the Disclosure Project and Dr. Stephen Greer's work. And I had seen the Disclosure Project and I was like amazed, like, how is this out there? And it's like not all over the news, right? You have all these high level people. So, and then again, I found Stephen Greer's work. And of course, kind of like a disclaimer thing, Stephen Greer is who he is. But when I found his CE5 work, I was impressed with when he was describing CE5. I was like, that's exactly how some of my experiences were, the way he was describing the consciousness aspect. And I hadn't, at least at that point, heard anybody talk about contact that way. So because that stood out to me, I started to look into his work and CE5, and I was like, why didn't I think about that, right? It was like so obvious. Like if I had these experiences with this consciousness component, why didn't I think to just like invite them, right? It's like, So I got very involved in the CE5 community at that point, actually. And again, that's a disclaimer thing, is like, back then I was very gung-ho about CE5 and like, yeah, why shouldn't everybody do it? Because I had felt after those experiences, like, even if I, again, one of the messages that I got from the non-human intelligence is what they wanted people to know about them and that they're here. And I'm thinking, like, how am I going to communicate that? But even like, number one, who am I to even communicate that? But I had realized that, like, unless somebody has an experience for themselves, it's not going to click. Right. I can tell my story or whatever all day long, but unless somebody actually has some kind of experience, that's what it takes to have that, like, bam, to have the kind of like ontological shock, paradigm shift, the kind of like transformation, so to speak, of your awareness after having some kind of experience like that. So that's why I really appreciated the idea of CE5, is that, you can facilitate that kind of interaction if you feel safe to, that's a whole discussion in itself. But I really appreciated that aspect to it. So I got very involved in CE5 because, number one, because I wanted to see, oh, wait, can I do this then? Which it absolutely works. And it's, again, there's all different kind of traditions and occult systems and whatever. The idea of contact modalities goes back as far as human beings do, basically,
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at Baen.com.
Contact, I think most religions are based on or at least a central theme in most religions, is humans interacting with non-human intelligence, whether you call them angels or jinns or devas and what have you. Many traditions all talk about humans interacting with non-human intelligence. And like today, maybe in the Western world, we kind of look at religion as like, okay, we're kind of doing this tradition thing. And, some people read the Bible and whatever, but like, if you're to believe in those religions, those events actually occurred, right? And so all of these religions and traditions are telling you that what your tradition is includes non-human intelligences and includes angels actually interacting with humans, right? So why is this idea of UFOs so kind of like, oh, it's a kind of idea? Like, no, like I thought all religions were kind of like based on the reality of that having actually occurred. So why would it be any different today? So I just want to put that out there. But right. But so I got super involved. I started the first like CE5 internet communities on social media because there was like this crappy, excuse me, CSETI forum, which was sort of like CSETI members. And it was like, cool. But I'm like, why isn't this on Facebook? Right. Like it needs to be updated. So I just started doing it myself and interacting with, identifying and communicating and cooperating with all these, like the kind of like the official, unofficial, because there, in Stephen Greer's mind, he was the only kind of like official person, but which is again another story. But there were CE5 field workers around at least the United States, and I found it in other countries too. But so the group started out, there were maybe like 200 or 300 people, and then 500 people, and a lot of them were working group leaders and participants. And, that led me down a whole thing of basically participating in contact modalities and CE5 rigorously. I mean, again, I had just had these experiences, so I was doing like hours of meditation a day. I was doing CE5 pretty much daily. And again, I'd have like a 2-3 hour meditation session somewhere earlier in the day, and then later a whole nother session with CE5 in the evening at night, and sky watch and have CE5 experiences and see anomalous things there. And I mean, and that's a whole, that's a whole book right there, really, just even that. And so because of that, I became very involved kind of, I guess, in the social network UFO community, but I wasn't on Twitter. It was a lot on Facebook. And so even then I was interacting with people like Richard Dolan and other researchers. And so this is back in like even 2008, 2009 that I'm actually involved in the UFO field, but somewhat low key because ufology is what is or was stigmatized, right? But back then, CE5 was
it still is stigmatized.
It still is extent. To some extent. Like there's definitely
not what it used to be, but
correct.
Still stigmatized.
Right. But CE5 was stigmatized even within the UFO community. So I'm within a niche, within a niche, within a niche kind of thing. Right. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I was kind of very underground, even though I was very active. And at that point, I'm reading like everything I can get my hands on, while also, practicing intently with not only CE5, but meditation and all this other stuff still very, very intensely. So I had many, many encounters after that, right? That I try to say that, like, once you're really like linked in with like non-human intelligence and different contact events occur in your life, it's not just like, oh, I had one event and then I had another event. They're all meshed together in this ongoing story of contact and interaction. So I don't necessarily view them as like, oh, this event happened, this event happened. In a sense, yes, right? Like there is a kind of linear timeline of these events occurring, but there's this element there's an ongoing interaction, like a bigger picture interaction that's going on the entire time, even from when I'm a kid, right? To even who knows when, right? Which brings me to like in the midst of all that, right? Because I was active on this on a daily basis, right? For years. And I ended up interacting and going out for field work with many, many hundreds of different CE5 field workers or contact workers, is what Dr. Joseph Burks have dubbed. I don't know if you had Dr. Joseph Burks on your show ever, but I think you should definitely reach out to him. That's a whole...
Say more. I definitely will, but say more.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Okay.
About Dr. Burks.
Dr. Burks he was with CSETI beginning in 1992. He's a medical doctor working in emergency trauma, similar to Dr. Greer. He got involved, and he has a very unique stance because he was part of the CSETI kind of like the main team, and then ended up 5 years later parting ways. But he has a very close inside look at the operation of CSETI, the pros and the cons, the successes they had with actual genuine contact events that did occur, and surveillance that was done on the CSETI teams, right?
Who's doing the surveillance?
Exactly. Right. Who's doing it, right?
Does he know?
You'd have to ask him, but I suspect he has his own suspicions. But definitely somebody with resources and military access. I even had events out with Dr. Stephen Greer too, which were genuinely anomalous, right? I don't know if you want me to get into any of that before I get into the other stuff, but I could easily...
Let's do one of those stories, and then, well, let me step back. Have you ever had any close encounters of the, I guess, third kind? I think that's actual, like
a biological entity? No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, again, those shadow entity things, I don't know if you consider that. Again,
that counts, I think. Yeah.
Well, but here's the thing to that too, is that I don't know that those entities were related to UFOs. Even though while I was a kid, it wasn't like a major event, but I did see UFOs as a kid, right? Like lights in the sky. Nothing, not like metal discs or anything like that, but lights in the sky. That I even had one of those little disposable cameras that I would go out late at night and try to take pictures of them. And I think maybe once or twice I tried to develop them and nothing came out in them, but there was that kind of continuous thread, right, of interest and some kind of activity. I mean, at that age, I wasn't even able to discern maybe, oh, that's a satellite kind of thing. I was really not of that mind at 9, 10, 11, 12. But there were anomalous lights in the sky, and I was called out to see them, in the sense where I had the impulse to go out and I would see them, and somehow I knew they were UFOs, right? That kind of thing.
Well, let's talk through another like anomalous experience that was, in your opinion, poignant for you.
Well, I do want to get into the CSETI kind of experience thing, because again, at that point, I got very involved in CE5, and even though I was convinced that what Dr. Stephen Greer was saying is true to some extent, right? Like, I felt that the way he was talking about it, he knew through experience. He knew details about contact that you could only know firsthand. And I knew that from having the experiences. So that, again, that caught my interest. And, again, just as a disclaimer, I don't support everything that Dr. Greer says by any means.
Look, he's a complicated figure. He's done a lot of work that helped advance disclosure. And, there's other things in his background that counteracted some of that effort. And we don't know why, right?
Right.
It
and
could be that genuine, he was compromised by the intelligence community in his later years, or I don't know. I'm just speculating. But yeah, he's a complicated figure. You don't have to.
Yeah. Like, I want it to be clear to people that, like, in the same vein, like, you'd be silly to throw out everything that he says, because he, out of a lot of the UFO researchers, he had a lot right. But it comes down to a big thing of this personality war and bias that, like, dude, the guy was talking about special access programs in the early 90s. Nobody was talking about unacknowledged special access programs until Lou Elizondo came out. Right? Like, he because he had people from the special access programs come to him as whistleblowers. Some of the people that he put forward publicly are questionable, for sure.
Right.
There's people that would not go on the record because they were a real deal from those programs that reached out to him and gave him maybe some real information, maybe some false information. So that, again, that's a really long discussion right there. But what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of really, really, really good and key information that he had early in the 90s that is not even relevant until post 2017, right? So he was like 30 years ahead of his time in that regard, including stuff about like unacknowledged special access programs, because he had legitimate people in those programs come to him. So what I'm saying is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You got to be able to see what is like Stephen Greer being Stephen Greer and what's the real deal, which is there. So, but again, that aside, I decided to go out to some of the CSETI events, right? So the first one I went out to was a 3-day event in Rio Rico, Arizona in 2010. And by this time, I was already like practicing CE5 daily. I just had, I had to save up the money to go out to one of these events, which are now incredibly crazy expensive, and you don't need to go out to any of these events. And I mean, even at that point, I didn't, but I still felt like I wanted to go out and kind of test, like, oh, is this guy actually the real deal, even though I had experienced the CE5 myself after practicing it. So the first event on the first night, Stephen Greer's version of CE5 or the CE5 protocols, or he does his protocols, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just so people don't mix this up, you can do a CE5 without doing CE5 protocols. The protocols are the CE5 protocols. CE5 itself is just a human-initiated close encounters with non-human intelligence or UFOs, just to be clear. So even on the first night, we're out, we're doing his style of kind of Vedic Sanskrit meditation. That's his approach. He actually, most people don't know, he used to be a TM instructor. So he has a background in that. And, again, he is a very skilled meditation instructor. I'll say that. Like, he knows his stuff when it comes to that stuff. So anyways, he was facilitating his teaching the CE5, and there's actually, at this event, there were 200 people. So you have 200 people doing a CE5 together, which is not the greatest for having the best like CE5 close encounter experiences, in my opinion, because it's too fragmented. The smaller coherent groups are more effective, generally speaking, unless everybody's practicing regularly. But so the first night, we're out on this kind of like outdoor part of this resort in Rio Rico, and we're doing the meditations and the CE5 stuff, and they're going through the protocols, and I'm sitting down, and all of a sudden I see this ruby red orb maybe like 20 feet away and like 10 or 15 feet in the air, like, again, almost the size of a volleyball or basketball. But it was this ruby red, but it was like, it looked like it was imprinted on top of reality, right? That's the best way I can describe it, is like if you stare into a light and then you look somewhere and you see that kind of...
Yeah, the after image, right?
The after image, right? It looked exactly like that, but it was like a ruby red, clearly. And I'm like looking around, like, is anybody else seeing this? Because this is like crazy, right? And it vanished after a few seconds. And I'm like looking around, nobody else is like, so I'm like, I don't think anybody else saw that. So I'm not even going to say anything, because at this point I'm like, did I just like trick myself into seeing that? Or did I create something I want to see? So I just kept it to myself. And then maybe a minute later, Stephen Greer took a green laser pointer and he circled the exact area, and he said, there's just a ruby red orb right there. And I was like, wow. Okay, so there's something is there, right, to that. And there were other, what people call flash bulbs, or like pinpoints of light in the sky that are anomalous. Like it's not a geosynchronous satellite or anything like that. They're just like random flashes in the sky that are frequent during contact modalities and CE5 work. So, and there were like shooting stars that would go from horizon to horizon, just like nothing kind of like in your face, but anomalous activity. So there was all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up going to a second week-long event in the year later, 2011. And again, there were a lot of genuine and anomalous experiences. And again, I'm not saying that it was facilitated by Stephen Greer. Everybody was there as a participant. So it's that kind of collective and coherence that is helping to facilitate the experiences and encounters. But I should actually say, most people don't realize that Stephen Greer was like the Christopher Bledsoe of the 1990s. Most people don't put two and two together, maybe because they haven't been around in the field that long, and they hear, wow, Chris Bledsoe, and he's having these incredible experiences, which I think he absolutely is. I think Christopher Bledsoe is the real deal. And, again, that's why he had intelligence people swarm around him. But in the same sense, the same thing happened to Stephen Greer in the 90s. He started facilitating these CE5s. One of them happened in 92 over the Gulf Breeze in Florida, and that attracted the attention of some intel and military people. And, people started to swarm around him too in the intelligence community, the same way they did with Chris Bledsoe, right? It was just a different crowd back then. And different people approached him for different reasons. And we can say whatever their involvement is with those individuals and the messaging that goes out afterwards. And that's a whole nother thing. But anyways, so those were impactful experiences for me. And again, I had already been doing CE5 on a daily basis at that point, and then went to these events and, felt, I guess, more empowered. And I had already, before I had went out to those events, I started the CE5 community on the social media. So I'd been connected with a lot of different field workers. We traded information, techniques, methods, experiences. So I was very involved in that sense. And somewhere, I believe it was after the 2011 week-long event, it was either right before or after that, where I had this, again, you can say a download, but it was like a lucid dream, but it felt like a simulated reality. And, during this very lucid and vivid dream, like time was not, sometimes when you have a dream, like everything is going like really fast. This was very like real time feeling. And all of a sudden I'm in this field, right? Like, again, I'm in this dream, boom. And I'm in this field. And it was almost like the sense of like 4th of July. Like it was a summer day. Everybody had like towels out on the ground and we were in this open field.
Mm-hmm.
And I was being guided by this, like a magenta orb. And it was communicating with me telepathically, and it almost sounded gargled as if it was like talking underwater. There was like an energetic water audible communication.
Like a warble of some sort. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, this is in a dream, and I was understanding whatever it was garbling. Okay. And it was guiding me. And I saw, there's like hundreds or thousands of people out in this field with almost like, again, their towels laid out and stuff. And there's like open contact occurring. Like there's crafts going over in the sky and everybody can see them. Right. So it was like an open contact event. And out of all these people, again, maybe there was like many hundreds or thousands of people out there. I couldn't count them. Obviously, they're just like all over. Again, like if you're out watching fireworks for the 4th of July, that kind of thing. But the orb was guiding me, and I saw out of all these people, maybe like between 1 to 10% of them. I don't know how to say it. There were just like a few individuals who were also following orbs, like communicating with them the same way I was. And what we were doing was going around telling people like, it's okay, right? Like, don't worry. We were somehow assisting with this process of open contact. And I don't know if this dream was just some random stuff that my mind conjured, or if it was a like a facilitated like a test to see how I would react, or if it was, yeah, again, some kind of simulation, or even like a precognitive thing. I don't know. Or if it was just metaphorical or symbolical in a sense, right?
Where was it? Did you get a sense it was in like the
It was in the New
Hudson
York
Valley area?
area. Yeah, it was in the Hudson Valley area, and it was at one of these local schools, like out in their open field. Where, I mean, again, I had seen fireworks there as a kid, so maybe that could be biased or could be representational. I'm not sure, but it was in New York, and it was very much in the summer, and it was an open contact event.
Have you thought about facilitating an open contact event in the summer at this school?
It wasn't this whole thing. I don't feel like I had facilitated this. This was like on their end, like non-human intelligence was facilitating it. That was the impression I had. But
I mean, just think maybe you organize a CE5 event at that school in the summer.
I mean, I don't think I can get that kind of reaction from non-human intelligence. But I mean, I did very much. If there was like a level of experience and qualification for CE5, I mean, I would be, I guess you can say, on the professional level, right? Like I invested that much time and dedication and thought and practice, experimentation into the CE5 work. But I did have experiences where there was a kind of in your face CE5 experience as well. But that kind of thing, I mean, it felt like staged by non-human intelligence.
Have you ever tried an experiment where you just got a bunch of people on Zoom or something like that and tried to do it virtually and just see what appears in their local area?
There's what are called global CE5 events, right? And they've been going on since 2010. And Costa McCrease was the one who really kind of started that. And he started networking with people. And like, we just, there was like, it's still ongoing. And there's even a story behind all that, actually. But there's something called a monthly CE5, right? The monthly global CE5, where people kind of do that, but it's not very focused. I mean, for genuine contact to really occur, it can absolutely happen non-locally. I've been on the phone with somebody and we're doing a CE5 together and we both have an interaction simultaneously. Things like that. Started like this group called Non-Local CE5, and we were experimenting with that and got very interesting results. So non-local CE5 is it's a real thing for sure. But there has to be a level of coherence to it. It can't just be, in my experience and opinion, just like random people on the internet. It has to be a focused group. People have to be coherent with each other. Like if you create a small coherent group, maybe that's more effective than having like 100 strangers on the internet. Let's do this. Not to say that eventually there won't be some kind of event where it's just a bunch of random people. And I mean, that gets me to the idea of like, with all this disclosure stuff happening, or the UFO subject being in the mass media and more people with their awareness, attention, and focus on UFOs and the reality of it could trigger some kind of event like that anyways, not without any kind of facilitation of trained individuals, where just there. And it's funny enough, Tom DeLonge recently in an article wrote something to that effect, except it had a Collins Elite-esque spin on it, where we're inviting them into our reality by.
So you were literally teeing me up for exactly what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So are you familiar with Steve Mira, paranormal researcher?
The name sounds familiar.
So he's so close to the truth that the members of the U.S. intelligence community have approached him, and they're like, "Have you been talking to Kit Green?" And he's
wow. Wow.
He's like, "No."
Yeah.
But can you hold off on releasing this? So if CE5 is similar to what back in the 1800s would be the formation of like a circle for like a seance, okay?
Correct. Right.
So according to Mira's research, there's two ways to get in contact with non-human intelligences. There's the fast way and there's the slow way. Okay. The fast way is very dangerous. It would be like you teleport into the Oval Office and say, "Hey, Mr. President, I have a question for you," right? You might get shot, right? Yeah. You probably will get shot. So the fast way is like Enochian rituals, stuff that like John Dee would have done back in
right.
England, like Babylon working, right? Yeah. Like something that Parsons did, but extremely risky, extremely dangerous stuff. But you will get a response.
Correct.
Okay. Then there's kind of seances where it's like a very slow monthly burn. But one of the things that he said that resonated with what you just said is when you form a circle, and I'm going to also address that other thing, the Tom DeLonge comment, because it's also relevant here. When you form a circle, you need like 7 or 12 people, and you have to constantly swap people out until you get it just right. And the phenomena would respond quicker or more favorably, depending on who was in that circle. And then after a while, the circle just shows up and the phenomena appears. Like the line is open. You don't need to dial anymore. It's just ready to go.
Right. It's ongoing. Yeah.
Now, they did an experiment or a series of experiments back in the 90s called the skull experiments. Are you familiar with these?
It sounds familiar. I've heard of it, but I'm not recalling what it is.
So basically, it was
this about approach. An egregore?
No, you're thinking of the Philip.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a whole other.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
This podcast may actually be an example of a egregore. Your podcast might be an example of an egregore because there's a lot of collective energy that, initially the purveyor puts into it, but then it kind of takes a consciousness of its own. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I don't know the answer to it. I'm just speculating, right?
Yeah.
But there are people in the occult community that, through people I know, it gets back to me that, and there's other people who are working on this problem who have, the more influence you have, the more minds are focused on it, the more there's that concept could play out. But anyway, skull experiments, focus back on that. People don't want to hear me talk, they want to hear you talk. So with the skull experiments, they were gradually able to get physical phenomena. They were able to ask questions. They could hear disembodied voices. They were able to bring in sealed film, not in cameras, and get images on that film without unsealing it, right? They had all these sorts of experts. Toward the end of it, there's actual video of this being that looks like a classical gray, but more of a, kind of made of light, like they called it, looks light blue. They called it Mr. Blue, things like that. However, the experiment, they had to stop because it started getting out of control, right? There were just these NHIs coming through, maybe they opened a portal. I don't know all the details, but it got out of control. And then I think that's kind of what Tom DeLonge may be talking about. Like, you have to use discernment and you have to be very careful what you're inviting in.
Yeah, well, so the Tom DeLonge comment I said it's a bit Collins Elite-esque in the sense that the Collins Elite is allegedly, there's slightly different variations of who they are in the story behind it, but generally speaking, a fundamentally Christian group that believe that the UFO phenomenon is demonic. And, I think part of their ideology was that if you do disclosure and that many people are aware that the UFO phenomenon is real, that's an invitation for them to enter our world indefinitely. rather than these small skirmishes of them doing these intrusions and being able to enter where they can, that disclosure would indefinitely invite them into our reality. And that at that point, these demonic entities could take over. That's kind of, Tom DeLonge didn't say that necessarily, but it's very along the lines of the Cullen elite-esque thinking, which points in that direction. And that's why this very powerful and informed Collins elite group doesn't want disclosure to happen, because they genuinely feel that they're protecting everybody by burying this, because they're keeping the demons out, kind of thing.
So,
which isn't entirely, which may not be entirely wrong, right? Like,
right, and I don't know. Like, I try to keep a balance,
right? Same
of the love and light people that I interview as well, and they're not all.
I get what you're saying.
I'm crudely characterizing it. Like, I wouldn't say Preston Dennett is a love and light guy, right? He's not talking about channeling star seeds and this and that.
Yeah.
But he genuinely, based on his research, believes it's a beneficent force. They care about humanity. And then I have other people like Fringe who are like, it's, I'm not saying it's demonic, but it's demonic, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So I had a conversation with somebody when you talked about the Collins elite. The person that allegedly the intelligence community members of this group approached was this guy, Ray Boucher.
Ray Boucher, yeah.
And he's still around.
Yeah, I know. I spoke with him.
I think, I think every time he's about to do an interview or go online, he gets like really sick. Like,
same thing happened to me several times. Yeah.
So I don't have any firsthand experiences, because I know someone who knows him who said, I could absolutely try to arrange an interview. The problem is the last time he tried to do it, like, he got really sick. So, and I don't I think there's something to that. But actually, while we're on this topic, like, what happened with you when you tried to interview him?
Several times. I mean, I was in dialogue with Ray a number of times, and we had planned an interview, and then again, same thing, kind of, and it fell through a few times, maybe 2 or 3 different times. But I can't speak for Ray, but although he speaks about the Collins elite, he very much seems to be in line with their thinking without him saying that. And I think that he was kind of put off maybe by the name of my thing is engaging the phenomenon. So he might be thinking that I'm trying to push people to engage with that, when that's not necessarily what I'm doing, in a sense. I mean,
you're engaging with the topic, right? You're trying to grappling with it.
There is a part of me that says, like, we need a group of people that are skilled in doing that as a wild card. I think that we do need people. If there's no ever kind of like official disclosure, which I don't think, that's a whole nother thing, is you need a group of people.
James, we are the disclosure.
Yeah. Well, you need a group of people who could, that need to be able to have an ace up their sleeve and say, an event could occur at any time with a number of individuals that will make sure that there's no other way around it either way. I think that, and like, why wouldn't you want a group of experts on communication with non-human intelligence, right? Like, why wouldn't you want that? Even if you think that they're demonic, right? Why wouldn't you want experts researching that and providing that information to whatever, or going towards a study or whatever it is? I think, like, why would you turn a blind eye to such a potential, instead of like researching, oh wow, the Nimitz happened. Like, yeah, it's an incredible investigation, but like, if you can facilitate an encounter in real time even as a research proposition, why wouldn't you be doing that? And I think they've been trying to do that semi upfront and semi passively with Skinwalker Ranch and stuff, but it's weird because they'll talk about it behind the scenes in the Invisible College and stuff, but like, when it's publicly discussed, it's like poo poo. But they're doing the same thing behind the scenes but in the public, if you talk about it, it's a different story.
Have you ever been out there?
No, I have not been to Skinwalker Ranch.
Okay. I stayed the night not on the ranch because I don't know anybody on the ranch, but there's a property, UFO Valley Tours, that owns a piece of the mesa.
Yeah.
Right. So they're just to the north, like literally on the next property north of the ranch. And it's really cheap too. You can.
Yeah. And it sounds interesting. And this gets me to the hitchhiker thing. And it's weird. I mean, I've, for whatever reason, like, genuinely, as to my best knowledge, as the best that I can evaluate whatever's going on, my experiences have been overwhelmingly positive, right? It could be a manipulation, right? Maybe non-human intelligence is utilizing me to put out this messaging and is it that crazy? I have no idea, right?
But James, even the Collins Elite people, right? Like, if there are demons, there are angels.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Right? So even that worldview is not entirely, it just expresses the duality of the universe. And I think anybody who thinks it's all good is wrong. And I think anybody who thinks it's all evil is wrong. I think as above, so below.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Right. And, the experiences I have, while mostly plausibly deniable, right, have been very subtle, but with that one exception that I told you earlier, I would say have been universally positive.
Yeah.
Right? Like, never scary, never, just interesting. Even when, like I said, I spent that night at Skinwalker, the worst thing that had happened was that the wind blew a chair into the fire at me.
Yeah.
And even then, I just kind of brushed that off. I'm like, yeah, it's windy.
Yeah.
Right now, I was sleeping on the ground when that happened, but it's been pretty positive. So I think a lot of it depends on what your perception is and your intent and what energy you put into it.
Yeah, that's where I was going with this, is that there's some kind of reflective component to the phenomenon. And I don't want to, I mean, there's people that have had negative experiences, and I'm not trying to say that they're putting negative energy out and therefore they had a negative experience, right? It's not as simple as that. But for sure, there's something to people's perception and interaction with the phenomenon where, again, I cannot explain like why I've had mostly positive encounters and there's other people who have negative encounters. Is it because they're interacting with different beings or intelligences, or what the case is? Yeah, I don't think it's that simple, but at the same time, there's something to the reflective nature of the phenomenon as well.
I agree with you there. Any other things that you think are worth mentioning to the audience about this? Like, are we going to get disclosure anytime soon, or is that just a canard that keeps us distracted from the fact that society is already in the process of breaking down?
It's a both. Yeah, correct. And it's a both kind of thing. I think there are people within those factions, right? And there's probably a lot of double agents working both sides in the intelligence community. But I do think there are people that genuinely want a level of disclosure. Like, they absolutely do. Like, that is their agenda, that there is going to be some, whether it's because they can get some kind of contract or whatever it is, they want disclosure. It's probably multifaceted, as complex as any individual or human is. There's various elements at play. So I think that many of these people want disclosure that we see kind of like in the public or even in the research realm, who are those people that have been working on this for decades, want some level of disclosure. But of course, their disclosure is going to be based on what they believe is the truth about the UFO phenomenon. Some of them, their preconceived notions are going to come with that disclosure and what is disclosed. I mean, some of them have more access to information. So if they have some kind of disclosure that's more of a threat thing, like show me the information, I'm happy to look at it, right? But we can't make that call until we're there. And even on that level, I mean, like, I can only go based off what I experienced. That's my ground, right? Is what I experienced. That's the only thing I know to be true in that sense. And even that, again, could that be some kind of manipulation or influence, remote influence or whatever? Yeah, it could be. But in my gut, it doesn't feel that way. And, I think as far as disclosure, I encourage disclosure initiatives, like plain and simple. I do think, if I had to guess, that there are different factions. Some want a level of disclosure, and others are using the disclosure front for whatever they're trying to do that's separate from disclosure. And I think it's complicated. Even with all that, right? Let's just say that there's a faction that are opposed to disclosure. There's a faction that are pro-disclosure. In the middle, there's a faction that's trying to co-opt disclosure for their own purposes. Even within all that ongoing, and that's out in the public now, and it's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, working all those angles. At the end of the day, we're still getting more interest and more minds on the subject. More people are taking it seriously. And I think it's also an inevitability, right? Even the threat narrative, the threat conversation. Peter Levenda just put out the book War, right? And it addresses this kind of
Secret Machines War.
Yeah,
right?
Secret Machines War, the nonfiction book by Peter Levenda and Tom DeLonge. So I don't mind having those conversations. I think too many people have a knee-jerk reaction. Like, even if you think the phenomenon is positive, I don't think we should be afraid to go there. There's no way that we're going to have disclosure and that conversation is not going to come up, right? That's the first question people want to know. Are these entities or objects a threat? So instead of just trying to say the threat narrative is fake and avoid the conversation, then let's get on with it. Let's just have that conversation and go beyond it, right? Because you're not avoiding it. That's not going to happen. That's a idealistic dream that we're going to somehow just say all this is not a threat and we're done with that conversation. No way. Like, think about reality. People are not like that. So instead, let's have the conversation. Let's have at it and see where it goes, because that's the only way we're going to get through it, is to start it. To try to bypass the threat narrative it's just not going to happen. That's not how people are, right? So I think that you should have people being able to engage in that conversation and add perspective and their thoughts without trying to avoid it altogether. I just think that's unrealistic. And if you think that the UFO phenomenon is not a threat, then you have nothing to worry about, because we're not going to somehow outsmart and out strategize the UFO phenomenon. It's not happening. We're not going to somehow victimize it. Not happening. So I believe at the end of the day, the truth is going to come to light, and trying to avoid those conversations are only delaying it.
Yeah, especially at a time when the credibility of institutions is crumbling.
Right.
Right. They need to get this out fast before they're not in control anymore. And that's what worries me, is I think there's too much instability right now. They need to get this out. It's probably the only thing that could probably, would stabilize the situation, to focus people on something greater than themselves, as opposed to picayune day-to-day gripes about stuff that doesn't really matter, or just wasting resources on things that don't impact people's day-to-day lives, or the fundamental nature of existence. So anyway, it's very frustrating, but they need to do something fast. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, I think that, this may be our last and best chance to straighten things out in the modern day, because they've done their studies, and, they ran through some numbers and probabilities and said, maybe we shouldn't do this after all. right? There were a few think tanks that did that. And I think Hal Puthoff had talked about it, and other people had referred to Hal Puthoff being part of one of those studies, because there were more than one. And whatever the consensus of the group was, maybe we shouldn't put this out now. But I mean, Hal Puthoff seems like he, at least to some degree, wants some of this information out. So if he was part of that study and he's still behind the scenes, putting this information out there in whatever way he can about UFOs and, that whole group, right? Jacques Vallée, and they're all talking about it, right? They want the conversation to happen. I don't know what their version of disclosure is, but we have to move in that direction. And
well, here's an analogy, right? And this should resonate with you because you have kids. When you had kids, right? Or just before you had kids, were you like, all right, I know, like, I have all the answers. I got the college, like, it's all lined up. I know exactly, like, right? Did you?
No,
Did you have
no,
all the answers? No, it was just like, we got to do it. So let's. It's a leap of faith.
Yeah, you got to go with it.
You got to go with it, and then it kind of works itself out, right? And this is exactly the same thing. It's just, as a species, you just have to rip off the Band-Aid, right? Yeah. You can mitigate it and stuff like that, but it's, at the very least, if you assume Roswell's the first thing, which it's probably not, it probably happened thousands of years before. Right. But let's say, like, for 80 years, there's a group of people who knew about this stuff and they kept it quiet. Like, come on, right? And and a lot of those people, they're not the smartest people. They're not the most qualified people, right? Like, what gives them the right to decide what the entire species can know? And this is why I'm of the mindset that you just experiment and figure it out for yourself, because a lot of these clowns are just going to hold on to this for their own insecure reasons or their own greed or whatever excuse they tell themselves that they have to be on the secret and the rest of humanity does not. I think their time is over. And
yeah, I mean, I think there's probably been several generations now of gatekeepers. And I actually do legitimately believe that we're seeing what we're seeing now because a number of them are pro, like, let's get this out. But yeah, we've painted ourselves into a box, but how can we still do it? And I think we're witnessing that happen in real time, is that a number of them are for disclosure, but to have this entire legacy of whether you consider wrongdoing or...
Let me paint a dark picture for them, okay? So you see the stability of institutions right now, right? Let's say in a worst case scenario, the existing structures fall. What do you think people are going to do to these people when they raid the National Archives and find out who did what and said what and who was eliminated? What do you think is going to happen to those people when there's no law and order? How do you think they're going to fare in that situation, right? So they need to consider these things. I think it's better to come clean now than to be discovered when the information leaks and there's nobody to save them anymore. So that's pretty dark, but that's reality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, not that the UAP disclosure language and, the UAP Disclosure Act is like a sure thing, but it's very interesting to see that the language that have been put into a lot of those bills, right? They're talking about, like, hey, listen, you have a grace period of amnesty if you haven't committed like a terrible crime kind of thing, to cooperate and basically share what you know. I mean, it's interesting to me that in those languages, there's a lot of tells, right? They're talking about non-human intelligence over 20 times, retrieved objects of unknown origin.
They never say ETs. Arrow says there's no proof it's ETs.
Right. This is the careful language.
Yeah, these things are here. They've been here for a very long time.
Yeah. But again, in one of the languages in the past few years, they even said, was there a disinformation campaign waged against the American public when, how, and why. So, even people in Congress and the Senate are now asking these questions, which, I mean, again, who has so much faith in the institutions is one thing, but more importantly, that conversation is out there in the public now. So that's a very big deal.
And that's the other thing, too. There's people out there who, if the government brought out a crashed UFO in a truck with like 3 pilots, non-human pilots in chains, half the U.S. population would be like, it's a psyop, that's not real.
Right.
That's how much trust people have in institutions right now.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get, like, I don't believe anything I see anymore. I try to find somebody who's on the ground who can verify it. Until I do that, I'm like, I don't know, it could be true, it might not be true. I don't know.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, and to that, even if they want to get ahead of the narrative and the repercussions, they need to really consider to have that in mind. Like, even if you come out finally, who's going to believe you anyways? Like, that window is, and then again, if another, I mean, as you are based in the United States, if another country came out with it, I would think, wow, for the United States, that's really not cool. Like, not that our reputation in the world is great today by any means, as it was in decades prior, but like the United States being so involved in this topic historically, from different intelligence, military, and other different angles like that, like it's an opportunity to kind of like regain some kind of favor or, trust or accountability. Right. Mm-hmm. For the United States. I just think
they shouldn't be thinking like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to admit that we lied to we know you lied to the American people, like, correct, all the time, about things with far little, like,
less consequence,
fewer stakes. Right? Like, you went with a bat bit a pangolin and then was eaten at a wet market. Like, you told us that when it was like clearly the Wuhan Institute of Technology, which is the only level 4 biocontainment facility in all of China working on novel coronavirus research. You told us, it's like, hey, maybe there's a lab leak. You told us that was racist. And then the FBI comes out a year and a half later and it's like, yeah, that's probably the most likely thing. It's just like, so if I actually think, as you said, it's an opportunity for them to restore credibility in U.S. institutions, because right now there's not much left.
The thing is, they need to do it because I think the writing's on the wall at this point that it's going to come out no matter what, one way or another, whether it's like somebody on the level of like McCaslin just saying, screw it, like somebody within those programs just coming out and undeniably sharing some kind of information. Again, maybe he's not the best example, but again, you have somebody like Jason Sands, right? He kind of just went rogue. So the level that you're going to be able to predict at this point of what's going to happen, whether it's like a whistleblower or the phenomenon itself.
Yeah, the phenomenon has a vote, right?
Right.
They can just say, screw it.
Let's just say like Russia doesn't want to disclose, right? But there's one intelligence cell in Russia who's just like, fuck it, we want Armageddon. Let's just put this out there, make America look really bad. Like, you know what I mean? There's just so many possibilities. Like, why risk that when you can have some level of influence on the UAP campaign? That's not a slow drip that has too much of a window of compromise.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Russia or China hasn't already done it.
Me too. I'm like, I am too. Because that would be a wild card where even if they didn't have control over it, they could just make it chaotic for everybody.
Well, I mean, just imagine Russia could come out and say, not only is it real, but here's what the KGB during the Cold War learned about Operation Mockingbird. It wasn't just about some of this stuff. It was also about, here's another operation that we knew about that was being done on the American people. And oh, by the way, MK Ultra, I'm just making this up. This is entirely made up, folks.
I get it, yeah.
But by the way, like MK Ultra was a component of it because we were trying to do psychogenic blah, 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 right?
Right.
And people would be like, is this true? And then, of course, it'll be like, do not believe Russian propaganda. Everything is Russian propaganda. Anybody who repeats it is going to get a visit by, federal agents, this and that, which it's almost as if the stronger the reaction that the U.S. government has, the more that it's a tell that whoever's coming out is right over target.
Yeah.
Right. So I wish it wasn't this way, but you can't lie to the American people for decades and expect them to, put up with you if you continue to lie to them. So I think disclosure's coming from like people like you and me. I'm just trying to get to the answer. At this point in time, I don't see anything useful that the government does. Like, it just collects taxes and blows that money on foreign adventures and doesn't protect its own borders. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into it, but I don't see anything of use that they're doing anymore. So it's just like, I'm paying my taxes, and you psychopaths are going to do what you're going to do, but I'm going to find out what I'm going to find out, independent of the clowns that think they run the show. So that's where I am. I mean, it's a cynical attitude, but that's the only way we're ever going to find out what's going on.
Well, your cynical attitude represents, let's even say, a contingent within the United States. That's a repercussion of non-transparency. So if these individuals,
and James, it's not only that, like I was a believer. Like, I'm a veteran. I served.
Right.
No, and this is the contingent that's losing faith, and that's why it's scary. Right.
Well, and so that's what I'm trying to say, is that like that's a bad reflection on even our country, say as the United States, where I think it's time to right those kind of wrongs, right? To the extent of a genuine gesture. And I think there are people trying to correct that now, right? Like, they feel like it's their duty to make everything right, to right those wrongs and do the right thing for the American people. I do think there are people like that, and their hands are tied too. Like, they're just trying to do
right. Like, Lou Elizondo can't just say everything he knows because he goes to prison. And people who are like, well, why don't you just tell the truth? Or it's just like, because you go to prison. Like, would you be willing to go to prison to, like?
Yeah.
So that's what drives me nuts.
The dude already went through hell. Like, when he talks about almost going bankrupt and all stuff, I believe all that's true. Like, walking away from that kind of job and like having your family set up and then changing that, man, I don't know if I could have even been able to do that.
Well, and then moving your entire family from the East Coast to hyper expensive California, and then a few months later having that, sorry, we weren't able to raise money, but right? Like, after you move there with this hyper expensive house.
Yeah.
So I feel for the guy. And and granted, he, in my opinion, the group that he is the front man for has an agenda, right? I think the agenda is basically, let's tell them this part of the narrative so that we can come clean. But, he doesn't talk about abductions. He doesn't talk about, and that's, I think, deliberate.
Well, right? I mean, to his credit, he talked about abductions and implants in the book, and he's been talking about it. He talked about it on News Nation, but
he does talk about implants for sure. I do remember,
and abductions. But I think the area he can't go to is like probably like my labs and things like that, targeted individuals. He's not going to say anything that's going to compromise the intelligence community,
and he can't talk about specific crash retrievals except for Roswell.
So, I mean, I still, in that regard, I think he's doing his best in saying what he can say, right? And I do think that he wants to do it for the right reasons. I don't think that there's a negative agenda behind it. But at the same time,
when I say agenda, I don't mean positive or negative. I just mean like, there's certain information, there's a certain narrative that some factions want to get out. I think
that there are probably negotiations that have taken place or are in place to say, listen, we understand that we can't go here for whatever reason. We're going to protect the American people from this idea, but let's just get the reality of it out. Right.
100%.
And for better or worse, like, it's not going to go down any other way from officialdom. It's just not. So even for that to happen, that's a win. Let the other questions come later. Once you have the all of everybody in the world looking at it, I think everything is going to become a little bit clearer after everybody's involved. And I mean, look, you go on UFO Twitter and you say, hey, can you find this? Boom. Within like an hour, you have the answer to everything. Like so many things that you have so many skilled people working in these fields that unveiled the thing. So even if they only put out this, and this, I think all of it is going to come to light. It's just inevitable. It's the age that we're heading in with AI and the internet and the phenomenon itself and all these moving parts that is, again, it's inevitable that it's going to come to light one way or another.
Yeah, the other thing, I just had a really dark thought. I don't know if I should say it out loud, but well, I just will. But sorry, I don't know why I'm going dark right now. The other reason there might be a delay is the people running this program are slowly and methodically visiting people who had direct experience in the program and either shutting them up or making them go away. I haven't heard any reports about that, but I would not be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few stories of, I mean, again, it could just, I don't want to say be coincidence, but there were a few accounts where, you know, again, well, it's different because there's a few people that were whistleblowers that allegedly had first-hand information. Like one of them, Christopher Mellon was going to meet with, and like the guy passed away like right before he was able to meet with him. There were like a few stories like that. Nat Kolbitz was another one, but he was already on his deathbed, so he was already,
he was like in his 90s or something, right?
Yeah, so he was already sharing what he could. But you know, that's where you have the problem where some of them are not willing to come forward until they're close. You know, again, like Philip Corso, right? Like he was getting up there in age before he came out and started talking. So there are also instances where people aren't willing to really put themselves out there until they realize like I got nothing else left to lose. You know, that's
which is totally understandable and totally reasonable.
I mean, like these people are told, like when they're read in, like one of the first things that they're told is that, you know, and I think Lou and other people have spoken about this, David Grush and others, is like when you're read into the program, they make it very clear that they will exterminate you under the guise of Espionage Act and all this, and they have the ability to do away with you pretty much illegally, you know. You know, and
yeah, it's the Espionage Act of 1917.
Yeah, without kind of trial or whatever, like you're just gonna, you know, terminate with extreme prejudice kind of thing.
Yeah, and they will do that.
And maybe that's even the best case scenario compared to some of the other things they can do, right? I don't even want to imagine what kind of threats they give people. But I mean, again, there's brave people like David Grush who has come forward, even Lou Elizondo, you know, sharing what he knows. They really put a target on their back coming out into the public that way.
Yeah, 100%. All right, James, any final words for the audience?
Don't give up. Keep at it, man. I mean, you know, believe in yourself, believe in the process, make the connections you can, move forward with well intentions. Right? Don't investigate with a kind of malice or hatred, even if you're upset with the gatekeepers. The way you need to move forward in your work and your research is with your intention in a lighter place. That's what's going to guide you to the right places. If you have resentment and hatred in your heart, even when you're investigating, it's not going to be helpful. So, I mean, practice on, I mean, even for your own well-being and your own like self-care, you don't want to, those feelings are physically damaging to you, right? Like on a biological level, if we're talking about, the term is escaping me now, epigenetics and such. Like, you know, your thoughts affect your body, your well-being, and even your reality. So
thoughts create things.
Yes. So always move forward with not naivete, but encouragement, hope, and care, right? With the outcome for the best of everybody.
As within, so without.
Like 100%. 100%.
So thank you, James. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yep. Thanks for having me on. And I hope we speak again soon.
Definitely.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.